At his trial in 1964, Nelson Mandela closed his statement from the dock saying, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I've cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." And Nelson Mandela lived for that ideal, and he made it real. He achieved more than could be expected of any man. And today he's gone home. And we've lost one of the most influential, courageous, and profoundly good human beings that any of us will share time with on this earth. He no longer belongs to us. He belongs to the ages.
All right, folks, welcome to the Friday edition of the Steve Malzberg Show. That was President Obama yesterday, speaking of the passing of Nelson Mandela. And joining us now is Joel Pollak, editor-at-large for Breitbart News. And Joel, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. Good to talk to you. Little did I know, anyway, in having read your work and seen your work over the years, that you were born in South Africa, left there at a very early age, but went back to school in South Africa. So, this you have a sense of the history. You have a sense of Nelson Mandela that certainly I, from afar, don't have.
Well, I was fortunate to be there in a transitional time where I learned a lot about not only South African politics, but learned a lot about what I believed about my own political views and about American politics, because there are some important lessons that I think we can learn from studying some of what South Africa did and some of what it failed to achieve, the good and the bad.
Now, what's most striking and has been said over and over about Nelson Mandela, and is very, very true, he chose forgiveness instead of retribution. I mean, he came out. He tried to be a uniter, not a divider, and it's ironic that we have, I believe, quite the opposite in the president who was speaking of Nelson Mandela there. Quite the opposite in many respects. If you talk about the politics of Nelson Mandela, the beliefs of Nelson Mandela versus the politics and the beliefs of Barack Obama on many levels, internationally, domestically, economically, I think that the contrast is striking. But of course, they'll be held up by the media as maybe two of a kind in many respects. But having said that, talk about the caliber of a man who went through what he went through. Forming the choosing nonviolence, then seeing the Sharpeville massacre, and saying that we're not going to be nonviolent if our peaceful protesters are going to be gunned down by the government. Then sentenced to all those years in prison, and then gets out and has an attitude, I guess, quite different than maybe 90% of any other person in that position would have had.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. He was in an impossible situation. He felt nonviolent resistance wasn't going to work. They did it for about 5 years, and it got them nowhere because the apartheid government was determined to cling to power at all costs. And he decided that they had to apply some pressure to that government using violent resistance. Later on, his movement veered into terrorism, but in those early years, they were bombing pylons and railroad tracks and things like that, so as not to cause civilian death, but to indicate to the government that they were going to take up arms against it. So, there have been other liberation movements that have done similar things and done so in desperate circumstances, and that's when he did that. But yes, he turned his back on that when he got out of prison and suspended what they called the armed struggle,
and even
in order to have negotiations. I would just say one thing. I mean, his beliefs weren't that different from Obama's beliefs, or in fact the beliefs of many leftists. He was a believer, at least initially, in state ownership of minerals and resources and industry, almost a communist kind of belief system, even though he wasn't, at least outwardly, a card-carrying communist, and he kept the Soviet Union at arm's length. But he was willing to give up a lot of those beliefs
Right.
for the sake of the national good, whereas, unfortunately, we have a president who is not willing to compromise his beliefs, even when they've been shown not to work.
Right.
In Obamacare and elsewhere.
No, I think I expressed myself poorly. That's exactly what I was trying to say. And the willingness to bend and the willingness to do what's right for the country, whereas Obama is so politically aligned to his beliefs and his system that even if it's not working to us, I think he believes it's working towards his goal, which may not be the same goal that most of us have. But that aside, talk about the 5-year term in office of Nelson Mandela. And again, this speaks to who the man was as well. He could have stayed in office probably for the rest of his life or close to it and decided that would not be, again, for the good of the country.
That's absolutely right. In fact, there were many people who felt he should have run again for another term. But he really wanted to see a peaceful transition, knowing that the fate of other African countries was that their leaders held on far too long. I mean, look at Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe was elected in that country's first democratic election in 1980. And at the time, that was kind of the South Africa of its era. Wow, we had a civil war, essentially, between black guerrilla forces and the white minority government, and then it all got resolved in a democratic way, and all looked bright until Mugabe refused to leave power. And he's still in power over 30 years later. So Mandela really wanted to set a different example and restore the world's faith in Africa as a continent by saying, look, we really turned the corner on our past. Unfortunately, a lot of people hadn't turned that corner, not Mugabe and some of the people in Mandela's own party. But in that gesture, in leaving the way he did, he enabled South Africa to really establish a firm foundation for the future. And it's got a lot of problems, and some of those problems are getting worse. But
yeah, crime and HIV and things that got bad under his tenure, I guess. But he spoke out, if I'm not mistaken, against Mugabe and that kind of rule. And he also, talking about the terror and bombing things, he also did not support the Palestinians in their excuses where they would, kill Israelis, blow up pizza places, shopping malls, whatever, and innocent civilians would die. But since it was, quote unquote, under the guise in their eyes of freedom fighting, they didn't think they were really killing any innocent people. And Mandela did not go along with that.
Well, I think it's important to be precise. I think, to be fair, he did support the Palestinians pretty much without reservation in the early years. Or if it wasn't him directly, it was certainly his party did, because he was in prison for most of that Palestinian sort of revival under Yasser Arafat. But once the peace process started between Palestinians and the Israeli government in the 1990s, and Mandela was president of South Africa, he wanted that peace process to succeed, and so he discouraged the Palestinians from using terrorism. And certainly on a philosophical level, he rejected the arguments Palestinians were using to justify terrorism. And Mandela said, no, justice is blind. Justice applies to everyone equally. You don't get to claim that you have the right to kill other people just because you think you're the weaker side in a conflict.
Yeah. Well, very complex man, and a man, in many respects for the ages. And I just can't imagine going through what he went through and then emerging the way he did, and being as respected, by the world as he is. It's quite a life story. And thank you for sharing your expertise with us. I appreciate it, Joe. We'll speak to you again.
Thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Joe Pollak, editor-at-large, ladies and gentlemen, at Breitbart News, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. And yeah, when I found out that Joel had a South African background and knew, from his perspective, a lot about the life and times of his country and the leadership of Nelson Mandela and the story of Nelson Mandela, I felt it was appropriate to speak with him. We'll also speak to Alveda King later on in the show. Congressman Ed Royce, chair of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, joins us next, right here on the Steve Malzberg Show, Newsmax TV and radio.
The Steve Malzberg Show.